Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into a topic that affects everyone, whether you realize it or not. How does the United States government make and spend money? It's a big question, but don't worry, we're breaking it down in a way that's easy to understand. First, let's talk about how the government makes money. The US government earns its income mainly through two sources: taxes and borrowing. Number 1, taxes. The government collects money from individuals and businesses in the form of income taxes, corporate taxes, and social security taxes. These taxes are the biggest revenue source, making up about half of the total income. Think of it like the IRS taking a percentage of your paycheck every year. Alright, now that we've covered the basics of how the US government spends its money, let's dig deeper into how it actually makes money. You might be surprised at the complexity here. The government has several different ways of generating income. Let's break them down. First up, we have individual income taxes, and this is by far the largest source of revenue for the US government. In fact, about half of all federal income comes from the taxes you and I pay on our wages, salaries, and other income. This includes things like your regular paycheck, freelance income, and even investment income. Income taxes are progressive, meaning the more you earn, the higher percentage of your income you pay. The IRS collects this money, which is then used to fund everything from Social Security to defense spending. Individual income tax rates in the US range from 10% to 37%, depending on your income level. So if you're in the top income bracket, you're paying a higher percentage of your earnings than someone in a lower bracket. Next up, we have payroll taxes, which make up about 1/3 of the federal government's income. These taxes are automatically deducted from your paycheck and go directly into programs like Social Security and Medicare. These programs are essential for supporting retired individuals, people with disabilities, and the elderly in terms of healthcare and income. The total payroll tax rate is 15.3%. Half of that, 7.65%, is paid by you, and the other half is paid by your employer. The Social Security portion of this tax is specifically earmarked for funding Social Security benefits, while the Medicare portion is used to help fund health care for those over 65. Now let's look at corporate income taxes, which account for about 7% of the federal government's income. Corporations are taxed on their profits similar to how individuals are taxed on their income. So when big companies like Apple, Amazon, or any other corporation make a profit, they pay a percentage of that profit to the government. In the US, corporate tax rates are generally around 21%, but this rate can vary depending on specific deductions, credits, and the amount of money a company makes. While this may sound like a lot, some large corporations manage to reduce their tax liabilities through loopholes and deductions. Next, we have excise taxes, which make up about 3% of federal revenue. These are taxes on specific goods and services, like gasoline, alcohol, tobacco, and even airline tickets. The idea behind excise taxes is that they help raise money while discouraging consumption of goods that are deemed harmful or unnecessary. For example, every time you fill up your gas tank, you're paying an excise tax. The government also collects excise taxes on luxury items like expensive cars and yachts, and even things like indoor tanning services. Customs duties and tariffs account for about 1% of federal income. These are taxes placed on goods that are imported into the US from other countries. When goods are imported, companies are charged a tariff or duty, which is essentially a tax on those goods. These can be anything from electronics to clothing to food. Tariffs help protect US businesses by making foreign products more expensive, which encourages people to buy domestically. Lastly, we have a mix of smaller income sources, making up about 2% of total revenue. This includes things like income from investments, fees charged by federal agencies, and other minor sources of revenue. Some of this income comes from the US Treasury bonds the government holds, where they earn interest. Other money comes from fees, like national park entrance fees or visa application fees. While these aren't huge income streams, they still play a part in funding the government. Now let's talk about spending. The US government spends its money on three main areas: mandatory spending, discretionary spending, and interest on the national debt. Mandatory spending makes up the largest chunk, about 2/3 of all government spending. This includes things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These programs are required by law, and the government has to pay them every year. Next, there's discretionary spending, which is about 1/3 of the budget. This includes things like defense, education, infrastructure, and research. Congress has more flexibility here to decide how the money is allocated each year. And finally, we have interest on the national debt. As I mentioned earlier, the government borrows a lot of money, so it has to pay interest on all those loans. In fact, paying interest on the national debt is one of the fastest growing expenses in the US. So, let's break it down. How much money does the US make and how much does it spend in a typical year? Let's use the 2023 budget as an example. The US government is expected to make around $4.9 trillion in total income this year, mainly from taxes. Sounds like a lot, right? But here's the kicker. Spending is expected to be about $6.3 trillion. That's a $1.4 trillion deficit, which means the government is spending more than it's making. This is where borrowing comes into play. The government borrows money to cover that gap. So, even though the government brings in a lot of money through taxes and borrowing, it still spends more than it takes in. So, here's the bigger picture. When the government runs a deficit year after year, it adds to the national debt, which now stands at over $33 trillion. This is a growing concern because it means future generations could face higher taxes or even more borrowing to pay off that debt. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. The government has tools to manage this, and the economy fluctuates. But it's important to understand how the system works and how these decisions impact our daily lives. To wrap it up, the US government makes money mostly through taxes and borrowing. It spends money on programs like Social Security, defense, and interest on the national debt. Right now, it's running a deficit, which means it's borrowing more than it makes in revenue, and that adds up to a pretty hefty national debt. So now you know the basics of how the government handles money. Pretty wild, right? If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, subscribe for more videos like this, and drop any questions you have in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.